Construction Talk.
Hosted by Whimsy.
The IGT report is a list of recommendations of how to implement low carbon for the construction industry sectors. But will the government endorse any of these recommendations? And if so, what does this mean for the construction industry? Well, joining me here today, fresh from the IGT meeting, is Don Ward from Constructing Excellence and Andrew Eastwell from BSRIA. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us here on Construction Talk. The first thing I want to start by asking you is, how have you been involved exactly with the Innovation and Growth team, and what is the team all about?
Well, the IGT was constructed with 5 groups covering non-domestic buildings, domestic buildings, infrastructure and large projects. And I was fortunate to be invited to join the non-domestics sector group.
So can you outline exactly the main findings of the report?
Well, the challenge is that the economy as a whole has got to save 80% of our current carbon emissions by 2050. And built environment accounts for half our current emissions. So it's a huge challenge. And if you factor into account things like air travel, built environment's got to do even more than its fair share, if you like. So the report looks at a combination of regulatory measures, basically tightening up the building regulations. We need zero carbon new housing by 2016. We need zero carbon non-domestic buildings by 2019. It then talks about incentivisation, how we're going to fund all this improvement, and so initiatives like the Green Deal, which the government has come forward with, are welcomed, and the report makes a number of recommendations on how to improve that Green Deal and how to extend it across other sectors. And frankly, there will be some elements of sticks. It's a sticks and carrots report, finance to help with the investment. At the same time, if you don't do it, here are going to be some harsh penalties. Government so far pretty supportive, I would say, but it's a bit early days. We're waiting for the government response before we know, to what extent the report is taken seriously.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the government there, because obviously the government you're hoping that the government are going to endorse some of these recommendations, but which recommendations particularly would you like them to go for?
Well, with 65 recommendations, it's unlikely that they're going to be able to endorse them all. But there's quite a lot of self-interest in here for government as well, because they do have long-term objectives. And my hope is that the ones that they pick up are the issues that are related to long-term development, whether it's long-term training issues. There is a good argument to be said, actually, that it's not the school leavers we should be looking at. It's actually the mid-career professionals, because mid-career professionals are in a position to influence things now, providing they've got the right knowledge. But long-term, of course, we're dealing with school leavers and so forth. So that's one long-term issue. The second one is to set an economic framework within which investors can make long-term decisions. Because investment in nuclear, investment in infrastructure like road and rail is a long-term decision, not a short-term one. So my hope is that government will take the self-interested view and deal with those long-term structural issues rather than short-term incentives.
So how exactly is this report relevant to the current industry and the climate that the industry is facing at the moment?
Well, the real good news in this is that we're talking about a 40-year programme to refurbish up to 26 million homes and a very large number of commercial buildings. So the relevance to the industry is that there's money to be made out of the IGT process. What we've identified is what those opportunities are, and it's up for industry to grab them.
Well, what sort of money-making opportunities for the industry does that produce then?
Well, whether you're a insulation installer, whether you're a heating installer, plumber, electrician, you're going to be talking about refurbishing most of current building stock over the next 40 years. If you can't make money out of that, no one can.
So it's a good thing all round, really. You think that that's why mainly it should be endorsed?
I think, to be fair, what you've got to realise at the moment is the industry's in tough times. This is the challenge of the recession means that there'll be people watching this video saying, hey, hang on guys, we're just trying to survive out here, and now you're expecting us to come in with a whole new level of performance, a whole new level of specification. Our clients don't want to spend more, they want to spend less. So the message is here, yes, there are opportunities, but the industry's going to have to get a lot smarter and a lot more efficient efficient at the way we all work together in order to get those opportunities.
About changing the way that the industry is seeing these opportunities, is that correct?
Yeah, very much so. And I mean, it's a whole team thing. You know, the client side of the industry has got to smarten up its act and be more efficient at the way in which it procures from our industry. And equally, the industry's got to be more client focused. It's got to be better at working in occupied premises. It's got to get its act together. Just in terms of being a modern, reputable industry.
Just to make another point, I can't imagine that in 20 years' time a householder will have to make the decision to buy double glazing from one company, his heating from another company, his solar collector from another company, his insulation from another company. I don't think that's how it's going to work. I think in the future they're going to want someone to be able to assess the total requirement and then to provide things economically at the right time and at the right place. So the opportunity for the industry that supports that is get themselves into a position where they can offer that kind of service. And that, I'm afraid, it requires a bit of investment. It's tough times, but look to the future.
So this sounds like it's going to involve a lot of change if companies and industry sectors are going to become these one-stop shops, if you like.
Well, Paul Morrell has said, and I agree with him, that this is the largest change management process since the Victorian era. It's a phrase that's been frequently used, but actually it's right. The scale of this thing is colossal. What
sectors will the report affect immediately?
The main sector that we're talking about is housing. I mean, it affects the whole of the built environment. We were involved in the non-domestic buildings work, so schools and hospitals and offices. But the sheer scale of housing, you've the 26 million dwellings that Andrew mentioned earlier, and you've got probably 75% of those which are nowhere near the standard that you're going to need in 2050, and yet your average home, lasts 80 years or more. So you're looking at existing housing and the opportunity to have big, large-scale rollout programs running through a neighbourhood is huge, but there's some difficult logistics involved in that. But it's something like, isn't it, 50% of the buildings emissions are associated with housing?
Yes, that's right.
And the fact is that a lot of housing, but by no means all of it, a lot of housing is pretty similar sort of stuff. So you know the sorts of measures that you need to install. You don't have to go in there and do a completely bespoke audit and work out a special package. You just know the sorts of measures, so you can cost effectively roll out a large amount of work.
Yeah, I agree with Don, and there's a couple of other factors that are important in here. The improvement of existing homes also addresses issues of fuel poverty, which are very important to all governments, but this one is no exception. And it also addresses the issue of energy security. The reality is there is not enough energy in the future, okay today, but in the future, just simply not enough capacity to go round. And the only way one of the ways we deal with that, of course, is to build more power stations, but it's actually much more sensible to reduce the loads before you start adding capacity. So I agree absolutely with Don. I think housing is the first issue, and they've already begun to start the first process in that with the budget.
Surely some of these things can already be implemented by the industry sectors without getting the endorsement of the government. Can they not go ahead and do that, or do they have to have that endorsement?
One of the roles here with government is to give confidence to consumers, and let's face it, we're not the industry with the greatest reputation and image in certain parts of what we do. So I think any endorsement that we can get from the Prime Minister down about the importance of this rollout programme, about the role that construction has to play in safeguarding our future environment is extremely helpful. And that's without the taxation and the other fiscal measures and the regulation that frankly are needed if we're going to achieve the scale. I think otherwise we'll get 10% of the benefit. What we need is that 80% carbon saving, and for that government has to play its part.
So you're looking for an official seal of approval from the government then?
I think it's slightly more complicated than that. The reality is that householders have a certain amount of disposable income, and they will dispose of it in a way that generally meets their short-term needs. So if they need a new kitchen is a very visible thing, or a bathroom, and you can see how the economics of that work. When you're buying something which has got a much longer payback period, typically in excess of 7 or 8 years, then the decision process is very different. And whilst we might like to think of a lot of people being altruistic, actually altruism has to be tempered with a certain amount of common sense. And if you're going to move house, it doesn't actually make much sense to invest in a lot of capital in the building, because you won't necessarily get it back. What government can do is to change the landscape to make those longer term investments worthwhile, and that's what things like the Green Deal are about. So it's not so much endorsement, it's providing mechanisms that allow long term investments to make sense.
So surely this must involve some sort of challenges for the industry as well.
Yes, for every opportunity there's a challenge, isn't there? And there's a big skilling issue. I've already referred to the skills required to be trusted to be in people's homes, frankly. Andrew's referred earlier to the fact that we'll move towards more integrated packages. So you'll have the same team doing insulation, heating, wiring, whatever. There are challenges there as well.
Do you think the industry is equipped for these changes yet, though?
Well, again, in times of severe recession, which is what large parts of the country are facing at the moment, then you have to say that people are trying to survive and not necessarily looking 5-10 years ahead at what those sorts of workflows might be. But for sure, this is a seriously robust industry. It's bounced back from every recession in the past. And we have this saying, never waste a good crisis. Now is the time to be looking ahead for what will be the profitable business in 3 to 5 years' time, and are you ready for it? And a lot of that challenge is going to be around upskill.
So generally it sounds to me like the overall message is building the future for the construction industry.
Yeah, that's right, but I don't think we're talking about Big Bang Theory here. We are talking about evolution, but perhaps slightly faster evolution than we've had in the past. This is more genetic engineering than natural selection, if I can call it that. And I think we are going to see the growth of new kinds of products. Energy supply companies, or ESCOs, working with smart meters in groups of buildings as opposed to single billing at the moment is one example. And we're also seeing the growth of integrated practices that deliver both the design, the finance and the facilities management in larger buildings. There are a number of organisations, Skanska for example, or WSP, are setting up those partnerships so that they can deal with the end-to-end issues, including financing, green financing. And that's entirely in the private sector. It doesn't need government to do it. It just needs government to set a landscape where that kind of partnership can thrive. And then you'll see lots more of them.
So finally then, gentlemen, what exactly is the 2050 team all about?
2050 team is basically the generation that's in their 20s at the moment. They're the team, they're the people that are going to be running our industry in the year 2050, when we'll have delivered this 80% carbon saving. So it's right to ask them now, what sort of industry do you want to be leading in 30, 40 years' time? So they came forward with the younger generation view of some of the challenges and some of the opportunities. And the fact is that generation just gets this stuff. Sustainability is pretty fundamental. Then they get IT as well. I mean, we were having discussions this morning about things like building and information modelling. That's a given for that younger generation. So yes, they see all this stuff happening. They want to be part of an industry which is modern, which is looking after the natural environment and the built environment, and is a responsible professional industry. But at the same time, they don't want us making big decisions now that store up difficulties for the future. And it was some of those dimensions that they were able to bring into the report, and I commend anybody to read what the younger generation thinks about our industry now, because if you buy into their vision, you can be pretty sure we're in safe hands for the future.
So it seems like you've got the present and the future all wrapped up and covered then really with this report.
Well, we'd like to think so. It's a start. The government response is important. The industry response will be equally important, especially as we start to come out of recession. Are we going to really build for the future, or are we just going to build to the sort of minimum standards of today?
Andrew and Don, thank you for joining us here on Construction Talk. Well, it would seem that the government now have a lot of food for thought with the IGT report, and we hope that they make the right decision regarding low carbon. This is Lindsay Rose Masora from the Chambers in Birmingham for Construction Talk.
Construction Talk.